Hi, I'm Poonam Dhanwate, co-founder of Tiger Research and Conservation Trust. We are delighted to be part of the Wildlife Conservation Network Expo, sharing our jungle journey with you. Harsh and me moved from being enthusiastic wildlifers and photographers to being conservationists in the year 2000 when we met Dr. Ulas Karan and moved our work to Tadoba Andhari Tiger Reserve. Tadoba Andhari is situated in central India and now is home to more than 250 tigers. The local youth who've worked for us for the last 2.5 decades have been the biggest asset of TRACT, addressing all threats and all research projects with us.
Hi, I am Harshvardhan Dhanwate, co-founder and trustee of Tiger Research and Conservation Trust. Tadoba landscape in year 2000 was a beautiful landscape, but having its share of problems of fire, of mining, of grazing, illicit removal of minor forest produce and poaching. Our work with Dr. Karanth gave us a great understanding of how to deal with some of the issues which were plaguing Tadoba at that point of time. When we did some field work and research, we drew some impact maps, and from those maps there was a lot of clarity on how to deal with some of the situations which were grievously injuring Tadoba at that point of time. With the understanding of the interventions and the forest department acting upon them, Tadoba enjoyed a lot of protection, and with the protection, the tigresses were breeding profusely as we had never seen them before. And the tigers were moving out in the corridors, they were looking out for space.
The initial few years of our work were spent on identifying threats with field data, estimation of densities of large carnivores and herbivores, and getting to know what needed to be mitigated. With a lot of efforts done with the forest department, by 2004-2005, most of the threats had been addressed and voluntary rehabilitation had been done. With tiger threats addressed by protection and tiger mortality decreased, they dispersed beyond boundaries into peripheral forests. Soon we saw tigers near human-dominated landscapes, and village trails and animal trails had pug marks with cycle marks and human footprints. Forced coexistence was seen around Tadoba. It was lovely to see tigers in peripheral forest and in the corridors around Tadoba, but attacks on people started, and soon these attacks peaked to almost 40 in 2007. And this was the year when we were asked by the forest department to help them understand why these attacks happened and what were the solutions or the mitigating measures that could be put in place to minimize these. Field information showed that there were lack of resources within the management, and the field staff were not trained, they were not equipped, they did not understand reasons for conflict. And the community had never had a direct dialogue with the managers to understand the threats that they faced and what was their role in mitigating conflict. Initially, rampant caging was done by the forest department to act as a pacifier. Maybe more than 15 to 20 leopards were caged in the year 2008, and we did help them rescue more than 10 tiger cubs which are now in captivity. It was in 2006 that we started our detailed observations and study of all the attacks that took place in this Chandrapur district, covering maybe more than 350 attacks over a span of 15 years. This data soon showed details of why conflict happened and what were the plugs that were needed to fill in the gaps. Our field surveys also showed lack of resources and training for capture of problem animals. The forest department was not equipped to address this coexistence and the mob that would that would gather each time there was a conflict situation. People did not know how to address or how to react to presence of large carnivore near their human dwellings. And caging that was done rampantly by the forest department, which was used as a pacifier, did not show much result. We did help the forest department address a lot of rescue of orphan cubs, and this is when we started collecting data and details about each and every attack that took place. So over a span of 15 years, we've covered more than 350 attacks on people by tigers and leopards. And this is the information that actually indicated and proved some earlier assumptions wrong as to why these attacks happen. It was always assumed that injured animals or old tigers who were not capable of killing natural prey would come close to villages and pick people or attack livestock. But this proved wrong. Actually, attacks happened because of the landscape. Every village was surrounded or was along the periphery of a forest. The natural resources, the water bodies were shared by livestock, people, and large carnivores. There was rampant open grazing happening in the forest, where now there were large carnivores present. And herdsmen accompanying these cattle were very vulnerable to attacks. But the most vulnerable community were the women who would go into the forest collecting firewood or other minor forest produce. Rampant unemployment resulted in a very high dependence of local communities on the forest, and their footprint into the bush made them very vulnerable to attacks. Open defecation in the bush was another reason why people were vulnerable. Additionally, the stray animals, the stray dogs, and the garbage near villages, and the carcasses of livestock not disposed of lured animals closer to villages now. So these reasons were very clear from the data of 10 to 15 years of our research, and this is what had to be addressed. This study also very clearly indicated that the attacks were not near villages. Majority of the attacks happened in the forest when people went in, and tigers tried their level best to avoid people. Even when there was a tiger in a village sitting there, he was stuck in a village for 11 hours. He sat quietly on a haystack waiting for people to give way so he could move out. So all in all, this decade-long study clearly indicated that conflict mitigation was a very complicated problem. It was a challenge that had multi-layered and multi-pronged solutions, and there were many stakeholders that had to address this mitigation together. And the two major stakeholders in this were policymakers and the local community themselves. Through our work for mitigation of this human large carnivore conflict, we worked across vertically. We worked with the grassroots communities, with the forest department staff, and with managers, doing research and study, and also working with policymakers, address and bring better benefits to people. So, coming back to our study, the 5 or 6 key reasons for conflict between people and tigers were addressed through a policy of the state, which brought in a lot of benefits, like firewood collection was addressed by cooking gas. We brought in toilets, solar lights were got in, and fencing to farms were brought in to make sure that people's farms were secure. We deepened lakes so that there was more employment, more financial benefits from a second crop of farming, so they did not depend on the forest for their livelihood. There was a lot of training programs done with school children. Forest department training programs were conducted so that they would understand reasons for conflict and the very important aspect of their dialogue between them and the community. The need to share information about the threat of a large carnivore near the village. which was missing earlier. So there was all this that we did right from 2011. But soon we realized that the community was a very major stakeholder in mitigation of this conflict. Until their participation was assured, conflict mitigation would not succeed. All our attempts in creating awareness within the community did not succeed because we were finally outsiders coming amidst them and trying to tell them what to do. So this is when the concept of primary response teams emerged, and we decided that we needed them or a group of leadership within them to tell the community how they should behave when they do go into the forest, or how they should secure themselves and their children from attack. What was their code of conduct? How did they need to address if there was an episode of conflict or if there was mob that would have injured an animal itself?
Hello everyone, I am Ajinkya Bhambulkar, working as a conservation officer for the Tiger Research and Conservation Trust. We have worked with the communities of more than 250 villages. From these villages, tracks have been created and trained primary response teams to address conflict mitigation. They have worked very closely with forest staffs, controlling crowds when there is a tiger movement near the villages. They have helping with the camera trappings when near the cattle kills. They also help the communities for getting compensation and documentation when there is crop or livestock loss. But there has been some challenges with these PRTs. There is a lack of motivation when there is no conflict, which is a major issue. They need, which is justifiable, for a bursary or wages and equipment is something we have been trying to address. But all in all, the concept of participation of the communities and their ownership towards their role in mitigation has been play a very important role to reduce human large carnivore conflict.
Workshops and training programs for these primary response teams have been conducted by us in more than 250 villages across the landscape now. Women and men are selected and they are trained in different aspects of mitigation. We've used manuals to explain to them how they need to address every episode that could happen which would lead to conflict or injury to man or animal. These small manuals are in the local language, illustrating different episodes that could take place. But all in all, the local community play a very, very important role in mitigating of human large carnivore conflict. Our work has been showcased in quite a few documentaries, and this has helped different landscapes to understand how mitigation could prove to be a success when you include communities. Best practices have been shared in these documentaries. Human large carnivore conflict is an outcome of success of conservation, and it is probably here to stay. Coexistence is here to stay, and this is a long-term continuous process of creating awareness amongst people, training the forest department staff, ensuring that every village where there is a presence of large carnivore has a primary response team which is part of the community that can help reduce their vulnerability to attacks. Ecotourism has helped create a social fence of well-wishers amongst the community for the tiger and the forest. Tadoba has shown the way forward to a coexistence of large carnivore and people, but our work needs to continue with the communities and training of the forest staff, identifying of problem animals, and monitoring of these dispersing subadult cubs that seem to be getting in trouble.